Sarah had always been the quiet one. While others in her circle pursued their goals with confidence, Sarah often found herself doubting her abilities. She was smart, kind, and capable, yet no matter what she did, the voice of self-doubt lingered in the background. If you're not good enough, it whispered. Everyone else is doing better than you. It wasn't that Sarah didn't have dreams. She did, big ones, but each time she thought about taking step toward them, fear crept in. What if she failed? What if others judged her? What if she couldn't handle it? These thoughts paralyzed her and kept her stuck in cycle of inaction. Growing up, Sarah was always compared to her older siblings who seemed to have it all together. They were outgoing, successful, and always seemed to be ahead of the game. Sarah, on the other hand, was more reserved. She excelled in her studies and was known for being reliable, but she lacked the same outward confidence her family and friends seemed to have. As the years went by, the comparisons continued, and so did her feelings of inadequacy. Sarah's self-doubt didn't just stay in her head. It crept into her everyday life. It affected her relationships, her work, and her personal ambitions. She would constantly second-guess herself, wondering if she was doing things the right way or if she was even capable of achieving her goals. The fear of being judged, of not measuring up, held her back from taking risks or pursuing anything that felt too big for her. It wasn't that she didn't have the skills, it was that she didn't believe in herself enough to put them into action. Sarah had always been the quiet one. While others in her circle pursued their goals with confidence, Sarah often found herself doubting her abilities. She was smart, kind, and capable, yet no matter what she did, the voice of self-doubt lingered in the background. You're not good enough, it whispered. If everyone else is doing better than you, it wasn't that Sarah didn't have dreams. She did, big ones, but each time she thought about taking step toward them, fear crept in. What if she failed? What if others judged her? What if she couldn't handle it? These thoughts paralyzed her and kept her stuck in cycle of inaction. Growing up, Sarah was always compared to her older siblings who seemed to have it all together. They were outgoing, successful, and always seemed to be ahead of the game. Sarah, on the other hand, was more reserved. She excelled in her studies and was known for being reliable, but she lacked the same outward confidence her family and friends seemed to have. As the years went by, the comparisons continued, and so did her feelings of inadequacy. Sarah's self-doubt didn't just stay in her head. It crept into her everyday life. It affected her relationships, her work, and her personal ambitions. She would constantly second-guess herself, wondering if she was doing things the right way or if she was even capable of achieving her goals. The fear of being judged, of not measuring up, held her back from taking risks or pursuing anything that felt too big for her. It wasn't that she didn't have the skills, it was that she didn't believe in herself enough to put them into action. One evening, Sarah sat down to reflect on everything she had been feeling. She had just received an email inviting her to speak at an upcoming conference on a topic she was passionate about, something she had worked on for years, but instead of excitement, all she felt was dread. The voice of self-doubt told her, "What makes you think you have anything valuable to say? There are so many others more qualified than you." She closed her eyes, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of her insecurities. She thought, "Why would anyone listen to me? I'm not like them. I'm not good enough." The decision was weighing on her. She could decline the invitation, stay in her comfort zone, and avoid the discomfort of facing her fears, or she could take chance even if she felt unprepared. It was in this moment of vulnerability that Sarah asked herself a question that would change everything. What if I succeed? What if this is the moment I've been waiting for? That question lingered in her mind as she stared at the email for a long time. For the first time, she realized that her self-doubt wasn't signal that she should quit. It was a sign that she was on the verge of something important. It was telling her that this challenge mattered. So with trembling hands, she hit accept and committed herself to stepping into the unknown. As the day of the conference approached, Sarah wrestled with her anxiety. She spent hours preparing, but no matter how much she practiced, the fear didn't go away. When she stood backstage waiting for her turn to speak, she was filled with uncertainty. Her heart raced and her palms were sweaty, but in the stillness of that moment, something shifted. She remembered the question she had asked herself. What if I succeed? And suddenly the thought that had once been source of fear began to feel like source of strength. Taking a deep breath, Sarah walked onto the stage. The spotlight felt blinding, but she focused on the message she wanted to share. She didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to have all the answers. She just needed to be real. And with that mindset, she began to speak. As she shared her story, she felt something she had never felt before. Freedom. For the first time, she wasn't trying to prove herself, as she was simply showing up as who she was, and it was enough. The response from the audience was overwhelming. People came up to her afterward telling her how much her words had resonated with them. Sarah couldn't believe it. Her vulnerability had connected with others in ways she hadn't imagined. In that moment, she realized that her self-doubt wasn't something to fight against. It was part of her journey, a reminder that she was pushing herself to grow. She didn't need to be perfect to make an impact. She just needed to show up and be authentic. This was the turning point for Sarah. She started to embrace the idea that self-doubt was a natural part of growth. It wasn't a sign of weakness, but signal that she was stepping outside her comfort zone. reaching for something greater. Instead of running from it, she began to welcome it, knowing that every time she felt it, she was growing stronger, and with each step, her confidence grew, not because she was free from doubt, but because she had learned to keep moving forward in spite of it. Sarah's story didn't end that day at the conference. It was just the beginning of her journey toward self-acceptance and growth. As she continued to face new challenges, she learned to approach them with courage, even when doubt lingered in her mind. And with each challenge she faced, she became more and more convinced that the voice of self-doubt was not something to fear, but something to learn from. This journey, like Sarah's, is ongoing. The road ahead is full of uncertainties, but as Sarah discovered, it's in those moments of doubt that we find the strength to push past our limits and discover what we're truly capable of. And in embracing the struggle, we learn to trust ourselves, to take risks, and to find success not just in the results, but in the courage it takes to begin. As Sarah continued on this path, she began to ask herself new question. What if this is the moment where I can truly change the course of my life? As Sarah stood backstage at the conference, she could hear her heart pounding in her chest. The crowd was already buzzing with excitement, and the moment she had been dreading for weeks was about to arrive. She looked down at the notes she had painstakingly prepared, but instead of feeling ready, she felt completely overwhelmed. What if I mess up? What if I forget what to say? What if they don't like me? The familiar voice of self-doubt crept in, whispering all the reasons why she shouldn't be up there at all. It would have been so easy to turn around and walk away, to tell herself that it wasn't too late to back out. But then something shifted inside her. She remembered the question she had asked herself just days before. What if I succeed? The idea of failure had held her captive for so long, but now she realized that her fear wasn't barrier. It was an opportunity to grow. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, reminding herself that she wasn't here to be perfect. She was here to be real. As she walked to the front of the stage, she could feel the weight of the moment, but she also felt something else, unexplainable sense of strength. In that brief moment of clarity, Sarah knew that this was the beginning of something much bigger than she had anticipated. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone, and she only needed to prove to herself that she was worthy of this opportunity. As Sarah began speaking, her nerves didn't magically disappear, but she started to feel more in control. She spoke from her heart, sharing her story with authenticity and honesty. The fear that had once seemed paralyzing was now something she could manage, and as she looked out into the audience, she realized that she wasn't alone. There were people out there just like her, struggling with the same self-doubt. Her words began to resonate with them, and it was as if shared understanding passed between Sarah and the audience. For the first time in her life, she wasn't standing on the outside looking in, and she was part of something bigger. When she finished speaking, there was a moment of silence that felt like an eternity. Then the room erupted into applause. Sarah couldn't believe it. She had done it. The voice of self-doubt that had controlled her life for so long had been quieted by her own courage. She realized that she had made it through the moment she thought would break her. The sense of accomplishment she felt wasn't just about the success of the speech. It was about finally overcoming the fear that had held her back for years. She had taken the first step toward building her confidence and accepting herself as she was. But even with the applause, the journey wasn't over. Sarah knew that this was just one small victory in a much larger battle against her own insecurities. As she left the stage, she felt a mix of pride and uncertainty. Was this the beginning of a new chapter, or was it just a fleeting moment of success? She didn't know the answer, but what she did know was that she had taken the first step toward silencing the doubts that had kept her in place for so long. Over the next few weeks, Sarah continued to reflect on her experience. She began to understand that self-doubt wasn't a sign of failure, but a sign of growth. She realized that every time she felt uncertain, it was an opportunity to learn to push beyond her comfort zone and to discover her true potential. The fear never fully went away, but she started to see it as something she could manage, rather than something that controlled her. Sarah made commitment to herself. She would no longer let self-doubt dictate her choices. Instead of running from her fears, she would face them head-on. She began to take on new challenges, whether it was speaking in front of a group, applying for a new job, or starting projects she had been putting off for years. With each new step, she felt herself growing stronger, more confident in her abilities. In time, Sarah came to realize that her self-doubt wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was part of her, but it didn't have to define her. Every successful moment, whether big or small, was proof that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. She began to see herself in new light, no longer as someone who needed to hide behind the shadows, but as someone who had the power to step into the light and shine. Her journey wasn't perfect, and there were still days when self-doubt tried to creep back in, but with each new step, Sarah grew more comfortable with the idea that imperfection was part of being human. She didn't have to have all the answers. She just had to keep moving forward, trusting that each experience would teach her something new. By embracing her fears and facing her doubts, Sarah discovered that the key to overcoming them was not to fight against them, but to accept them as part of the process. It wasn't about being free from fear. It was about moving forward in spite of it. And with every step she took, she became more convinced that the only way to truly overcome self-doubt was to keep showing up no matter how uncertain she felt. Now Sarah stood at the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The voice of self-doubt still whispered sometimes, but it no longer had the power to stop her. She had learned to take action despite the fear, and each time she did, she became more confident in her ability to handle whatever came her way. And with every challenge she faced, she continued to ask herself one question. What if this is the moment that changes everything? As Sarah continued to grow, she realized that the real victory wasn't in silencing the doubt forever, but in learning to move forward despite it. As Sarah began to step outside of her comfort zone, she found that the world didn't crumble around her as she had feared. Instead, things started to change in ways she hadn't expected. The more she pushed herself, the more she realized that self-doubt wasn't something to be feared, but something that could be worked through. She took on more speaking opportunities, each one a little less intimidating than the last. With every presentation, her voice grew steadier and her confidence grew stronger. But even as she started to feel more comfortable with her progress, the fear didn't completely go away. One evening, as Sarah sat reflecting on how far she'd come, she realized that the journey wasn't just about gaining confidence or proving to others that she was capable. It was also about finding peace with herself. There had been moments when she'd tried to measure her worth by how others saw her, and in those moments she always felt lacking. But now she was beginning to understand that her true value came from within. The fear she had always felt wasn't a sign that she was unworthy. It was simply part of the process. As Sarah continued to face new challenges, she found that each one gave her deeper understanding of herself. There were still days when she doubted her abilities, when she questioned whether she was really capable of achieving the goal she had set for herself. But she also realized that those moments were just part of being human. Everyone had their own struggles, their own fears, but it was how they handled them that made all the difference. One day, she found herself at crossroads. She had been offered a new opportunity to speak at a larger event, one that would put her in front of an even bigger audience. This time, the fear hit harder than ever before. The old thoughts crept in. What if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? What if no one listens? She had worked so hard to overcome her self-doubt, but now it felt like she was standing at the edge of new, even scarier challenge. For a moment, she considered saying no, playing it safe, and staying in her comfort zone. But then she remembered the lessons she had learned so far. The fear wasn't a sign that she should stop. It was a sign that she was on the verge of something important. She couldn't let her past doubts dictate her future actions. It wasn't about being free from fear. It was about pushing forward despite it. She had already come so far, and this was another opportunity to prove to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. The moment Sarah made the decision to accept the invitation, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. The weight of the decision didn't feel as heavy as it had moments before. She realized that each time she took a step forward, even if it was small one, she was growing. She wasn't going to be perfect, but she was learning, and that was enough. In the weeks leading up to the event, Sarah spent countless hours preparing, refining her speech, and practicing in front of a mirror. Each time she spoke, the nervousness was there, but so was the sense of excitement. She wasn't just talking to an audience, she was sharing something that mattered to her, something that could make a difference. She didn't need to have all the answers, and she didn't need to be flawless. She just needed to be authentic. On the day of the event, as Sarah stood backstage, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. The room was full of people, and she could hear the murmur of conversations just beyond the curtain. For a moment, she almost backed out. But then she remembered why she was there. She wasn't there to be perfect. She was there to speak from her heart. When it was finally her turn, Sarah walked onto the stage, her hands slightly trembling, but her heart full of purpose. She took a deep breath and began to speak. This time, the words flowed more easily. She didn't try to be perfect. She didn't focus on her fears. Instead, she focused on the message she wanted to share. And as she spoke, something amazing happened. The audience responded. They listened, they connected with her words, and in that moment, Sarah realized that the most powerful thing she could offer wasn't perfection. It was authenticity. As she finished her speech and the crowd applauded, Sarah stood there in awe. She had done it. She had faced her fear, accepted the challenge, and shown up as her true self. The applause wasn't the validation she had once craved, but a reminder that her voice mattered, that she was worthy of taking up space. She had proven to herself that she was capable of achieving things she once thought impossible. But as she left the stage, Sarah also realized that this victory wasn't the end of her journey. It was just another step in a lifelong process of growth and self-acceptance. The self-doubt would still be there, but it no longer had the power to hold her back. She had learned to embrace it, to move forward in spite of it, and that was where her true strength lay. As Sarah walked off the stage, she felt a sense of peace settle in. She wasn't done growing, and that was okay. The next challenge would come, and she would face it just as she had faced this one. And each time she did, she would continue to discover that her greatest strength wasn't in overcoming fear, but in moving forward with it. And as she took that first step toward her next challenge, she knew one thing for sure: she was ready. Her journey was far from over. Every step, every challenge, every fear was a part of her, becoming who she was meant to be. And as she looked toward the future, she realized that the path forward wasn't about avoiding fear. It was about walking through it with courage and conviction. As Sarah moved forward, there was a shift in her mindset. She no longer saw self-doubt as something that would stop her from achieving her goals. Instead, she started to view it as a signal every time fear or doubt crept in and reminded her that she was stepping into unknown territory that was ripe for growth. She had started to embrace discomfort as part of the process rather than a barrier to her success. It became clear to her that if she wanted to grow, she needed to continue moving through the discomfort instead of avoiding it. Her next challenge came when she decided to take on larger project. Community initiative to help young people build their confidence through public speaking. The idea of leading something on her own terrified her. What if she failed? What if the participants didn't respond? What if the whole thing fell apart? But as she considered her options, she realized that the fear of failure wasn't stronger than the desire to create something meaningful. It was in these moments of vulnerability that she felt her purpose was truly calling her. Sarah spent weeks planning and preparing, reaching out to local schools and organizations to gather participants. The nerves were ever present, but they didn't paralyze her like before. She had learned to push through them, reminding herself that every great achievement came with its own set of challenges. She knew she wasn't guaranteed success, but she was guaranteed growth, and that was enough. Her team grew with her. Every decision she made, every small step she took toward completing the project seemed to be a reflection of her evolving self-belief. Even when obstacles came up, Sarah was able to face them with clear mindset, one that was less about fearing failure and more about navigating it with resilience. When the day of the first session finally arrived, Sarah found herself standing in front of a group of eager faces, all of them looking at her with a mix of excitement and nervousness. In that moment, all the old self-doubts came rushing back. What if they don't take me seriously? What if they think I'm not qualified to lead this? But instead of letting those fears take over, Sarah allowed herself to feel the discomfort fully and then let it go. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't have to be. She was there because she believed in them and in herself. She stood tall and shared her own story of struggle, growth, and the ongoing battle with self-doubt. The group began to open up, sharing their own fears and insecurities. They weren't alone in this. They were all fighting their own battles, and in that space there was understanding and support. Over the course of several weeks, Sarah's participants began to transform. What once started as a group of uncertain individuals slowly became a community of confident, open-hearted speakers. Each participant started seeing their own potential and pushing through their personal doubts. And as Sarah watched them grow, she couldn't help but realize that her own journey was still unfolding. She wasn't just helping them build their confidence. She was continuing to build hers too. She saw the parallels between their progress and her own, never-ending cycle of growth that was fueled by vulnerability, courage, in action. They taught each other that the key to breaking free from self-doubt was in simply showing up every single day and being open to the process, no matter how uncomfortable it was. But even as Sarah witnessed the growth of her participants, she began to wonder if she was truly living up to her own potential. Was she taking enough risks? Was she challenging herself in the ways that her heart longed for? There was part of her that knew she was still playing it safe. The fear of failure, while more manageable now, still held grip on her. She had taken steps, yes, but what if there was more she could do? What if the true breakthrough she was looking for was just on the other side of her comfort zone? One afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected invitation to lead a conference on personal growth and self-belief. It was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of, but it also terrified her. The stakes felt higher than ever before. Would she be able to inspire a room full of strangers? Could she share her story in a way that made lasting impact? The voice of self-doubt began to creep in again, louder than before, but this time, Sarah wasn't backing down. She had come too far to let this moment slip by. This was the moment that could push her to the next level. She took a deep breath and accepted the invitation. The fear was still there, but now she saw it for what it truly was, an invitation to expand. Over the next few weeks, Sarah threw herself into preparation. She crafted her speech, not with the aim of perfection, but with the intention of connecting with others. She didn't want to stand up there as someone who had it all figured out. She wanted to be real and share her story of struggle and growth, because that was where true connection happened. As she practiced, she felt the familiar nerves, but also a growing sense of excitement. She was ready to take this leap, knowing that the growth she sought would come from doing the very thing that scared her the most. The day of the conference arrived, and Sarah found herself backstage, preparing to take the stage in front of a crowd she couldn't even count. The old voice of doubt whispered, but it no longer had control over her. She had learned that self-doubt wasn't the enemy, it was part of the process, and this time she was ready to move through it. She stepped onto the stage, her heart racing, but her mind clear. As she began speaking, Sarah felt a shift inside herself. She wasn't performing, and she was speaking her truth, and that was enough. When the applause came at the end of her speech, Sarah realized something profound. She had done it not because she had nailed every word, but because she had faced the fear acknowledged it and continued on. Anyway, she had grown in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Now, standing in front of the crowd, Sarah felt a new sense of peace. She had finally learned that her worth wasn't tied to being perfect or flawless. It was in her authenticity, her willingness to show up even when she was scared, and the courage to keep moving forward. But even as she looked back on this victory, she knew that her journey was far from over. Every new challenge was just another chance to grow, to push herself even further. The road ahead was filled with opportunities, and with each one, Sarah knew she would continue to learn and evolve, knowing that the greatest strength lies not in never feeling fear, but in moving through it. Sarah's journey was filled with moments that tested her belief in herself, but with each step, she became more aware of how far she had come. She realized that it wasn't about never doubting herself. It was about knowing how to move forward despite the doubt. Every challenge was an opportunity to learn more about herself. Every time she stood up in front of others, she faced deep inner battle between the voice that told her she wasn't enough and the one that encouraged her to keep going. And though the self-doubt didn't completely disappear, Sarah had learned to quiet it with action. She had learned to trust herself enough to take the next step, even when she wasn't sure where it would lead. But there was still something missing. Despite all of her progress, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding back. She was taking risks, yes, but was she truly stepping into her full potential? Was she truly living the life she had dreamed of, or was she still letting fear dictate the boundaries of what she could achieve? This question kept her up at night. She had always been a high achiever, but her greatest challenge now was realizing that her dreams were much bigger than she had allowed herself to believe. One evening, after a long day of work, Sarah sat in her living room, thinking about the next big opportunity that had come her way. Chance to collaborate with a renowned organization on a nationwide project. It was chance to make real impact, but it was also terrifying. What if she didn't live up to their expectations? What if her own insecurities would hold her back as much as she wanted to say yes? There was part of her that was hesitating. She thought of all the ways she could fail, all the ways she could let herself and others down. But then she remembered something she had learned during her earlier struggles. The fear of failure didn't have to stop her from trying. In fact, the fear was often a sign that she was on the edge of something important. She thought back to the advice her mentor had once given her. If it doesn't scare you, it's probably not big enough. That statement had stuck with her. It wasn't about finding the easiest path or staying in the comfort zone. It was about stretching herself, doing things that challenge her, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. Sarah knew that her greatest growth had come from moments just like this one, when the stakes felt high and the doubts were loud, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. So after sitting with her thoughts for a while, Sarah made decisions. She would take the risk. She would accept the project. Even though the fear of failure was still there, she wasn't going to let that fear dictate her path anymore. She picked up the phone and called the organization, letting them know that she was in. And as she hung up the phone, a wave of relief washed over her. It wasn't the absence of fear that gave her peace. It was the act of moving forward despite it. Sarah had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it and move forward anyway. In the days that followed, Sarah threw herself into the project. She connected with new people, collaborated on ideas, and made connections that expanded her network and her sense of possibility. It was hard. It was overwhelming at times, but it was also exhilarating. Every step she took seemed to unlock new potential, both in herself and in the project. She found herself thinking bigger than she ever had before, envisioning future where she wasn't just surviving but thriving. One afternoon, during a team meeting, Sarah shared her vision for the project, speaking with confidence and clarity. As she finished, she looked around the room to see the faces of her team members, all of them nodding in agreement. It was the turning point. She wasn't just a participant in the project anymore. She was leading it. She had stepped into her full potential, and the world around her had begun to recognize it. It was during that time that Sarah realized just how far she had come. She remembered the days when she couldn't even speak up in small meeting without feeling like she didn't belong. She remembered the times when she let self-doubt dictate her decisions, when fear of failure kept her from even trying. But now, as she looked at the work she had accomplished, Sarah saw something different. She saw a woman who had learned to trust herself, who had embraced the discomfort of growth, and who had stepped into her own power. She had learned that her potential was limitless, but only if she was willing to take the risk of facing her fears and moving forward anyway. But even with this newfound sense of accomplishment, Sarah knew that growth was a continuous journey. She knew there would always be new challenges to face, new opportunities to seize, and new doubts to overcome. She understood now that self-doubt wasn't something to be eradicated. It was something to be navigated, understood, and used as fuel for growth. As she reflected on the project and the journey it had taken her on, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had found deeper connection to her own strength, and she was ready to continue embracing it in every area of her life. And that's when the next big challenge arrived. Called to speak at major conference about the very topic that had shaped her journey. Overcoming self-doubt, Sarah hesitated for only a moment before accepting she wasn't perfect and she wasn't free from doubt, but she had learned the most important lesson of all. She was enough, and by sharing her story, she could help others see that they too had the strength to move through their own doubts. The journey was far from over, but Sarah was ready for whatever came next, knowing that her potential was always just on the other side of her fears. Sarah's decision to take on the project was game changer, but it wasn't a simple path to success. Each new task and challenge brought fresh wave of self-doubt. Even though she had taken that brave step forward, the voice inside her head still whispered that she wasn't enough. In meetings, she would occasionally freeze, wondering if people could see her vulnerability. What if they knew how unsure she really was? Could they tell that she often questioned whether she truly belonged in the room with people far more experienced than she? But rather than retreat, Sarah began to recognize that this was part of the process. Every time she felt that surge of fear, she reminded herself that it was a sign that she was stepping into something new, something important. Instead of fighting the doubt, she started embracing it. She acknowledged the fear but chose to act anyway. It was not about removing the doubt entirely, but about learning how to keep going in spite of it. One evening, after a particularly challenging meeting, Sarah found herself sitting alone in the office, staring at the paperwork spread across her desk. She had spent hours working on a proposal, and yet something didn't feel right. She knew it wasn't perfect, and the thought of submitting it made her stomach churn. Doubts flooded in. What if the team rejected it? What if she wasn't good enough to handle the weight of this responsibility? But then memory surfaced. It was a conversation she had had with her mentor years ago, right before she decided to take her first big leap into this industry. Her mentor had said, "Perfection isn't the goal, progress is. Don't wait for the fear to disappear before you move forward. It won't. You just have to keep going despite it." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind, and she realized that they applied now more than ever. It wasn't about perfection, it was about doing her best and trusting that her best was enough. She had learned that showing up and doing the work was the most important part of the process. So with deep breath, Sarah hit send on the proposal, choosing to trust in her abilities, even though the voice of doubt was still there. The next few days were filled with tension. Sarah couldn't help but replay the moments leading up to submitting the proposal. What if she missed something? What if they saw all the flaws she had tried to overlook? But then something unexpected happened. The team called meeting to discuss the proposal, and Sarah's heart raced as she walked into the room. To her surprise, they were impressed. Not only did they accept her proposal, but they also asked for her input on future projects. It was a small win, but for Sarah, it was a monumental step in overcoming her self-doubt. That moment became the turning point for Sarah. She had always been quick to dismiss her achievements, telling herself that she wasn't as qualified as others or that she hadn't earned her place. But with this success, she started to see things differently. She realized that self-doubt had kept her from truly celebrating her progress. Instead of focusing on what she lacked, she began to shift her focus to what she had already accomplished. Each success, no matter how small, was proof that she was capable. As Sarah continued to work on the project, she made it a point to celebrate her small wins. She took time to reflect on what she had learned, even when the results didn't meet her expectations. She began to see that growth wasn't linear. There would be days when she felt like failure, and there would be days when she felt on top of the world, but all of it was part of the journey. And through it all, Sarah learned to embrace the process rather than the destination. One afternoon, as she was sitting in a cafe after an exhausting week, Sarah received a text message from her mentor. It simply said, "How are you doing?" It was a question Sarah hadn't asked herself in a while. She had been so focused on the demands of the project, on moving forward, that she hadn't taken a moment to check in with herself. With a smile, she typed back, "I'm learning to trust myself more." It was a simple response, but it felt like the truth. Sarah had spent so long waiting for the self-doubt to disappear, but now she understood that the doubt would always be there. It was part of being human. The key was not to let it stop her from doing the things that mattered. As she reflected on her journey, Sarah recognized how much she had grown, how much more confident she had become. She was no longer the person who would shy away from the challenge. She was the person who would face it head-on, knowing that she was capable of handling whatever came her way. But even as Sarah found her footing, she knew that the journey was far from over. There would always be moments of uncertainty, times when she would question her abilities or wonder if she had made the right choice. But the difference now was that she had developed the tools to move through those moments with grace. She had learned to embrace the discomfort, the self-doubt, and the fear. She had learned that those feelings didn't define her, her actions did. And it was in those moments of doubt that Sarah discovered her greatest strength, the ability to keep going, to keep growing, and to keep believing in herself no matter what. With each step forward, Sarah moved closer to becoming the person she had always wanted to be, not because she was perfect, but because she was willing to face her fears and continue evolving. And that, she realized, was enough. This realization set the stage for the next big moment in Sarah's journey, a moment that would test her in ways she had never imagined before, pushing her to her limits and challenging everything she thought she knew about her potential. But whatever came next, Sarah knew that she had already overcome the greatest obstacle, the voice of self-doubt, and now she was ready for whatever came next. The project Sarah had been working on for months had finally reached a critical point. She had pushed through her doubts, taken the necessary steps, and made it this far. But now she was facing an even bigger challenge. The presentation was scheduled for the next morning, and Sarah knew that it could make or break her career. The weight of the responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. As the day of the presentation drew closer, her anxiety began to creep in. She had doubts about whether her ideas were solid enough, whether her delivery would be convincing, and whether the team would appreciate her contribution. Her mind raced with questions, and she found herself revisiting every detail of the presentation for the 100th time. She had rehearsed countless times, but as the clock ticked down, the fear of failure threatened to overwhelm her. What if she was wrong? What if her colleagues didn't agree with her? What if she stumbled over her words in front of the entire team? These thoughts consumed her, but she knew she couldn't allow them to control her. That evening, Sarah decided to take a break and step away from the project for a while. She went for a walk in the park, the cool evening air offering welcome distraction. As she strolled, she thought about how far she had come. Just a year ago, she had been riddled with insecurities, wondering if she had what it took to succeed in a high-stakes environment like this. Back then, she never would have imagined that she would be standing on the precipice of big opportunity like this one. She had come so far, and yet self-doubt still crept in at the most inopportune moments. But as she walked, something shifted within her. She realized that the fear she was feeling was not a sign that she wasn't ready, but rather a reminder that she was pushing herself to grow. This moment, this challenge, was an opportunity to prove to herself just how far she had come. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, doing the best she could, and trusting that she had the ability to handle whatever came her way. By the time she returned to her apartment, Sarah felt a renewed sense of clarity. She knew that no matter what happened in the presentation, she had already accomplished something significant by simply stepping out of her comfort zone. The journey wasn't about eliminating fear, but about learning how to move forward despite it. And with that realization, Sarah felt ready. The next morning, as she stood before the team, Sarah's nerves were still present, but they were no longer in control. She took a deep breath, focused on the message she wanted to convey, and began the presentation. As she spoke, her confidence grew. She could feel herself settling into the moment, her words flowing with purpose. The questions from the team came, and instead of freezing, Sarah answered each one with clarity, supported by the research and ideas she had worked so hard on. As the meeting came to an end, there was a sense of relief and accomplishment in the room. Sarah's colleagues nodded in approval, impressed by her insights and the thoroughness of her work. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and Sarah felt a wave of pride wash over her. She had done it. She had faced her fears, pushed through the doubt, and delivered a presentation that exceeded her own expectations. But the real lesson came after the meeting. As Sarah reflected on the experience, she realized that the true success wasn't just in the positive feedback or the approval of her team. The true success was in how she had grown throughout the process. The self-doubt she had struggled with didn't disappear overnight, but it no longer had the same power over her. She had learned how to navigate it, how to recognize it as a part of the journey, and how to move forward despite it. This victory, though significant, was just another step in her ongoing journey. Sarah knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt, and more opportunities to grow. But for the first time in a long while, she felt ready. She had learned to trust in her ability to face the unknown and to keep going no matter how difficult the path ahead might seem. And with that sense of empowerment, Sarah looked toward the future with confidence. She knew that no matter what obstacles arose, she would be able to handle them. The key was not in avoiding fear or self-doubt, but in learning to move forward in spite of them. It was this resilience that would carry her through the rest of her journey. But Sarah's growth didn't stop there. She had learned to face her fears and doubts head-on, and now she was beginning to realize that the most important part of the journey wasn't just about overcoming obstacles. It was about using those challenges to empower others. She began to think about how she could share her story, how she could help others facing similar struggles understand that they too could find the strength to move forward. As Sarah took a step back and reflected on the bigger picture, she realized that her story was just beginning. The lessons she had learned, the self-doubt she had overcome, and the confidence she had built were all tools that could help others. She was ready not just to take on her own challenges, but to use her experiences to inspire and uplift others. With this newfound clarity, Sarah set her sights on what was next, knowing that each step forward would be another opportunity to make difference, not just in her own life, but in the lives of those around her. Her story wasn't just about overcoming self-doubt. It was about sharing that strength with others, empowering them to believe in themselves too. Sarah sat quietly in her office, staring at the blank screen before her. The looming deadline for the proposal was just hours away, and her mind was a whirlwind of doubts and insecurities. She had been assigned to lead the project for the first time, and the pressure was mounting. Everyone expected her to be the expert, to have all the answers, but Sarah felt like she was barely holding it together. The fear of failure gnawed at her, and for the 100th time, she found herself asking, "Am I good enough for this?" She had always been the type of person to second-guess herself, to question whether her ideas were strong enough or if she was really capable of taking on such significant responsibility. Her past experiences had given her a glimpse of her potential, but they hadn't completely eradicated the inner voice that told her she wasn't enough. That voice was loud today, more so than ever before, As she thought about how she had gotten to this point, she remembered the times when her self-doubt had held her back, when she hesitated to speak up or take risks because she was afraid of being wrong or judged. But Sarah also knew that she couldn't afford to let this self-doubt paralyze her any longer. She had come so far. She had been given this opportunity because others believed in her. She had spent years working hard, proving her worth and learning new skills. She couldn't throw all of that away because of one moment of fear. The thought of quitting, of walking away from this responsibility, made her heart sink. She had worked too hard, grown too much to let her doubts take over now. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her emotions, but also the flicker of something else. Hope. She remembered something her mentor had once told her. Self-doubt is not the enemy, it's a signal that you're pushing yourself to grow. That simple piece of advice had always stuck with her, but it felt especially significant now. She had been in this position before, unsure of her abilities, wondering if she could handle the pressure, but every time she had proven to herself that she could. The difference now was that she had learned to embrace the discomfort of self-doubt instead of running from it. With renewed sense of determination, Sarah began to type. The words didn't come easily, but she kept going, allowing herself to make mistakes along the way. She would revise, refine, and improve. It was not about perfection. It was about progress. She reminded herself that even though she wasn't sure of every detail, she was capable of figuring it out. The thoughts that had once held her back now became fuel for her to move forward one step at a time. As Sarah worked, she reflected on her journey. The years of self-doubt hadn't disappeared, but she had learned to live with them. She had learned to take action despite them. The growth that had come from facing those doubts head-on was immeasurable. She wasn't the same person she had been when she started. Every challenge, every setback had shaped her into someone stronger, more resilient, and she realized that each moment of self-doubt wasn't something to fear. It was an opportunity to prove to herself that she could rise above it. After hours of work, Sarah finally hit send on the proposal. She sat back in her chair, exhausted but proud. She had faced the fear and uncertainty that had threatened to paralyze her, and she had kept moving forward. The proposal wasn't perfect, but it was her best effort, and that was enough. She had taken that first step, and now it was out of her hands. The next morning, Sarah received an email from her manager praising her work. Her proposal had been well received, and the team was excited to move forward with it. The feedback wasn't just about the quality of the proposal. It was also about the growth Sarah had demonstrated throughout the process. She had been honest about her doubts, but she had also shown the courage to keep going, to keep working through them. That was the kind of strength that her team appreciated. But Sarah's growth didn't stop there. She realized that her story was one that could help others who struggled with the same doubts and fears. She had spent so many years thinking that self-doubt was something to hide, something to be ashamed of. But now she understood that it was a natural part of growth. It was okay to feel unsure. It didn't mean she wasn't capable. It simply meant that she was challenging herself, pushing beyond her limits. With that realization, Sarah decided to take the next step in her journey. She began to reach out to others, sharing her experience and offering advice to those who felt the same way she had. She wanted to create space where people could embrace their doubts without letting them control their actions. The more she shared her story, the more she saw how powerful it was to be vulnerable, to admit that self-doubt didn't make her weak. It made her human. Through these conversations, Sarah realized that her story wasn't just about overcoming self-doubt. It was about learning to live with it, to use it as a tool for growth, and in sharing that message, she could help others find their strengths too. The process of facing her fears and doubts had not only transformed her, it had shown her the power of community, of supporting one another through shared struggles. Sarah knew that her journey was far from over. There would be more moments of doubt, more challenges, and more opportunities to grow, but for the first time, she felt truly empowered to face them. Self-doubt would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had learned to navigate it, to embrace it, and to move forward with it. And now she was ready to help others do the same. In the end, Sarah's message was simple but powerful. Self-doubt doesn't have to hold you back. It can be a stepping stone toward your growth, signal that you're on the right path. It's not about eliminating doubt. It's about learning to take action despite it, knowing that you are capable, worthy, and enough. Every challenge is an opportunity to prove to yourself that you can handle it, and with each step forward, you become stronger, and that, Sarah realized, was the most important lesson of all. When Sarah first started her career, she was full of ambition and eager to prove herself. But with each new challenge, self-doubt crept in, and it wasn't long before it became constant companion. She would often sit in her office, staring at her computer screen, wondering if she was truly capable of succeeding. The doubts were so loud at times that they almost drowned out the voices of encouragement from those around her. Am I good enough for this? What if I fail? The questions filled her head, making it difficult to focus on the task at hand. She knew one thing for sure. If she didn't find a way to overcome this, she wouldn't get very far. One day, as Sarah sat in the quiet of her office, she came across an article about the most successful people in the world. They all shared a common trait. They had learned to embrace their self-doubt instead of running from it. The article spoke about how self-doubt wasn't a sign of weakness, but a natural part of growth. In fact, it was a signal that you were pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone, that you were challenging yourself to become better. That message resonated deeply with Sarah. She realized that her doubts weren't something to be ashamed of. They were an opportunity for growth. This moment of clarity became the turning point in her journey. From that day forward, Sarah began to shift her perspective. Instead of letting self-doubt hold her back, she chose to face it head-on. When she felt unsure about her abilities, she reminded herself of the times when she had overcome obstacles before. She reflected on her achievements and the hard work that had gotten her to where she was. She no longer saw self-doubt as an obstacle, but as part of the process. It was simply a reminder that she was striving for something more. Sarah's transformation didn't happen overnight, but with each step forward, she grew more confident. When difficult project came her way, she didn't shy away from it. Instead, she embraced the challenge, knowing that it would push her to become better. When the self-doubt returned, as it inevitably did, she met it with a sense of curiosity instead of fear. What can I learn from this? She would ask herself. How can I grow through this experience? One of the most significant moments of Sarah's growth came when she was tasked with leading a large, high-profile project. It was the huge responsibility, and she found herself overwhelmed by the pressure. But instead of letting the doubt take control, she took a step back and focused on the task at hand. She broke it down into manageable pieces, setting small, achievable goals for herself. With each goal she accomplished, her confidence grew. By the time the project was completed, Sarah had not only successfully led her team, but had also proven to herself that she could overcome her self-doubt. As Sarah's career progressed, she continued to face new challenges, and with each one her self-doubt would resurface. But now she understood that self-doubt was not an enemy. It was a tool for growth. It was a sign that she was pushing herself to be better. Rather than letting it hold her back, Sarah embraced it, using it to fuel her growth and propel her forward. She knew that every challenge was an opportunity to prove to herself that she could handle it. And with each victory, no matter how small, she built the confidence to face the next challenge. Sarah's story is one that many of us can relate to. We've all faced moments of self-doubt, wondering if we're truly capable of achieving our goals. But the truth is, self-doubt doesn't have to define us. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that we're pushing ourselves to grow. When we learn to embrace our doubts, to view them as opportunities for growth rather than obstacles, we open ourselves up to new possibilities. We become stronger, more resilient, and more capable of achieving our dreams. So, if you're struggling with self-doubt right now, remember this. You are not alone. Every successful person has faced the same doubts you're feeling. The difference is that they chose to move forward despite those doubts. They chose to embrace their discomfort and use it as a stepping stone toward growth. And you can do the same. The next time self-doubt creeps, and instead of letting it hold you back, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what can I learn from this? Use it as a signal that you're on the right path, that you're pushing yourself to grow. Break your challenges down into manageable steps and celebrate each small victory along the way. Remember, self-doubt isn't the enemy. It's the beginning of your growth. If Sarah's story resonated with you, know that you, too, have the strength to face your self-doubt and transform it into something powerful. The journey won't always be easy, but each step forward will make you stronger. And as you continue to grow, you'll realize that self-doubt no longer has the power to hold you back. It becomes the fuel that propels you toward your greatest achievements. You have what it takes. Embrace your doubts. Take that first step and trust that you can overcome anything. The only thing standing between you and your success is your willingness to keep moving forward despite the fear. So go ahead, take the leap.